So let's talk about optimizing your nonprofit's website for the year ahead, right? Like a lot of us start the year with big plans, with big goals. And if you're serious about reaching them, then it's really important to just get your website dialed in so that it's supporting those goals. But something that we've noticed is it just seems like a lot of these types of posts, this type of content about optimizing your site for a new year tend to be these really big undertakings. And a lot of times the beginning of the year is a pretty busy time. And so what we've tried to do is just pull out four really easy, high leverage changes that you can implement yourself without needing to write any code, without needing to call a developer. And then we've also included a very concrete action plan with all of them so that they're the types of things that you could go implement tomorrow and hopefully have in place really quickly to just position yourself really well for the coming year. Now, I also want to mention the beginning of the year is a great time to sort of dial in your website and tackle these types of projects. But if you can't get to this for a few months, that's totally fine. If you're watching this replay in June, that's totally fine. Like just fit these changes in when you realistically can carve out a few hours to do so. So the first one here, we recommend reading every page of your website for consistent messaging. We all set out to tell a compelling and cohesive story on our website, but imagine trying to write a book one page at a time over many years. Like there's just no way that that story would tie together well for your readers, but that's exactly what's happened with a lot of our websites. Especially if you've been around a little while, you've probably added new pages here and there. You've removed some pages, you've combined some pages, and slowly over time, some inconsistencies or some gaps in your story just start to kind of creep in. So those gaps can add up and eventually just lead to some inconsistent messaging that'll confuse visitors. And something we say often is a confused mind never converts. If a visitor is confused, they typically won't stick around and try and clear up that confusion. They're just going to leave. Especially now, we're just more stretched for time and more stretched for just mental bandwidth than we ever have been. So, the nice thing is it's pretty easy typically to clear up this inconsistent messaging without a whole lot of effort. And we're going to dive into just how you can tackle it in a day. But as a big takeaway from this session, if you walk away with nothing else, just this idea that a confused mind never converts, I think is a big, just global takeaway that I find myself coming back to time to time again. All right, so let's talk about how to clear this up. Again, the goal is to start by reading your site's content. We recommend doing it annually. You can just set a recurring calendar invite for, the first or second week of the new year. Maybe that's a quieter time for you seasonally after you've gotten through the mayhem that is end of year. But whenever you sort of have a quieter period, just set a calendar reminder, read through every page, one page at a time. For most sites, reading every page won't take more than a couple of hours. If your site is huge, then start with your highest leverage, most popular pages. And if you need help finding those, we have a video on YouTube that we'll link up in the chat that walks through just how to pull that out of Google Analytics 4. A lot of things are really hard in Google Analytics 4, but thankfully this report is actually pretty easy. You can see the video is just over 2 minutes, pretty straightforward. And as you review these pages, I recommend, if at all possible, blocking out your calendar so that you can read these relatively uninterrupted. If you're doing a bunch of stopping and starting when it comes to reading these pages, it's just a little harder to see the full picture and spot any inconsistencies that might be popping up. And speaking of inconsistencies, note any that you find, but don't worry about making changes to anything just yet. Instead, what we're going to do, we're going to document these inconsistencies and look for things like variations in your messaging or differences in your voice. Maybe there's some language or some phrases that you've moved away from over the years. Just note the pages that you think are worth coming back to, and then include just a little bit of detail about, what you noticed on each page, link each page. in the sort of just notes that you're taking so you can easily jump back in. And then what you'll have is just a punch list of changes that you can work your way through as time allows in the next, few days, the next few weeks, whatever capacity looks like. We actually hosted an office hours last year, which looks like, and I know some of you that are on this call here today were on, but the topic was how to audit your nonprofit's website, how to find its strengths and weaknesses. And if you joined that one, you might remember we had an audit template that you can use to review your website. So that same template will come in handy with this type of exercise. We'll share that link in the chat as well. It'll be the template, and then on that link, you'll also find a recording that walks through how to use it. So feel free, if it would be helpful to get just like a step-by-step guide going through that, go ahead and watch that video. It'll really guide you through the full process. So next up, you're going to make any changes. And here's where you're going to just start working your way through that punch list. Now, one way to prioritize these is to break them up into two distinct buckets. So one bucket is going to be these pages or details that are just flat out wrong. Like they are just inaccurate. They say things in a way that you are just not, it's just false information at this point. Those are often easier places to start because you can essentially just replace the incorrect information with correct information. It's a little bit more black and white. The other group is more of that gray area, the things that are not as compelling as they could be, but aren't flat out incorrect. It tends to be a little bit fuzzier here in terms of the changes that need to be made. And a lot of times what we recommend here is really, if you haven't dialed in your messaging and gotten really clear on, like your positioning, how you talk about your work, start with that. And then move into making these changes. Again, we did an office hours on this topic as well. Some of you may have been there. We brought in Jordana Merkin, a messaging expert, and she dropped all of her knowledge on how to dial in your messaging. It was fantastic. So we will share that resource as well. If dialing in your messaging is on the docket in the new year, that would be, I think, a really helpful place to spend a little bit of time. And the final part in this process is just document your messaging for future reference. So once you've finished making, especially those high leverage changes, just don't forget to document, your style, some tips about your messaging, your organization's voice, maybe some examples of content that you just spent some time refreshing, possibly even some like formatting choices, that you prefer to stick with. It doesn't have to be fancy. A Google Doc is totally fine here. The idea is just by documenting some of these things today, you'll save you and your team time in the future. So be sure to share it with your team. And then that way, if multiple people are working on the website or writing content for the website, there is some cohesiveness to the way that your story is told and the way the pages are put together. All right. So next up is clean up your conversion paths. So first of all, what the heck is a conversion path, right? So a conversion path is just the journey that a visitor takes on your website from the moment they land to where they take action or convert. And a conversion is just a meaningful action that folks are looking to take on your site. Often includes things like taking a donation or registering for an event or signing up for volunteer or reaching out for services or your programs. But it can also be steps that are earlier in their experience of getting involved with you. So it could be like signing up for your newsletter or even potentially like downloading one of your resources, something like that. It'll obviously vary from organization to organization, but every step of these visitor journeys build on the one before it until your visitor ultimately takes that meaningful action or converts on the website. Now, when you first launch a conversion path, generally things are really dialed in. You've put a lot of care into your calls to action. You've gathered and shared some really compelling stories or testimonials from your community. Your forms are crisp and streamlined, and you probably you tested the form, worked your way through the process, made sure everything worked how you would expect. But over time, it's really easy for these conversion paths to start to break down. The calls to action get a little less consistent. Pages maybe have been unpublished and links get broken. Maybe it's been a minute since you tested out that form and made sure that it was still working how you would expect it to. And these sort of like bumpy or broken steps in a conversion path can create a lot of friction for your visitors. And friction here is just anything that slows them down, anything that adds difficulty to the process of taking that key action that we're looking for folks to take. And if that process is really confusing or slow or completely broken in some cases, it's going to create just so much friction that they're not going to ultimately take those meaningful actions on your website. And you're going to see website engagement and ultimately conversion rates start to suffer. So you typically want to be removing as much friction as you can, but how do you actually do that in practice? So the action plan here, start by outlining the key actions your visitors want to take on your site. Sometimes you already have this documented. That's great. You can use that. But if not, just think about what those key actions are for visitors. And for each key action, we recommend connecting it to the problem that brought them to your website initially or the challenge they're trying to solve, because really diving into that why behind their visit and the action that they're looking to take on the website will help you understand their motivation and just help you more tightly align your conversion path and your messaging to meet your visitors' needs every step of the way. It'll just make it more likely, ultimately, you'll turn more casual visitors into active supporters of your cause. And next, you're going to want to complete every conversion path from start to finish. Now, it's really kind of time to role play here. Just put yourself in your visitor's shoes, remind yourself of the challenge that your visitor is facing, and also how you got to the website in the first place. So what I recommend doing is start on the most likely landing page of your site for that particular conversion path. And just remember, a lot of times this is not going to be your homepage. It might be a program page or an event landing page or a blog post for a relevant topic related to maybe some research that you've done or whatever kind of queries they're typing into a search engine. If you need help finding your most popular landing pages, we also have a video. We'll link it up. This one's under 2 minutes. Again, something that's pretty easy to pull from Google Analytics, thankfully. So we'll drop that in the chat, and this will help you find your most popular landing pages, which can help give you clues about where some of these user journeys are starting. And then what you're going to want to do is just, like I said, role play, walk through the whole conversion path, start to finish. Read the page, click the call to action, fill out the form, submit the form, review the thank you page, review the email that you get after you submitted the form, and just kind of note how you feel about the whole experience and document anything that could be dialed in, refreshed, tightened up to make it as likely as possible that someone will complete that process. And as you're working through these conversion paths, note and prioritize the changes that you need to make. Just like before, we're not making changes immediately. Just document any issues you're running into along your journey. You can jot down any ideas right off the top of your head about how to improve them. But really, the idea is to generate a list so that you can start prioritizing them into needs to happen items and nice to happen items. And to help you prioritize, we recommend sort of just following this really simple model. So the first is consider the impact. Just how essential is this conversion path to your mission? You want to start with those conversion paths that are really important, really central to the impact that you are trying to have in the world. Next, consider the reach. Just how many of your visitors does this affect? Maybe it is a really small subset. It's a really niche program or something like that. Or maybe it's your main program and it affects a lot of your visitors. So you want to consider the reach. And then finally, consider the cost. Just how much time or money will it take to fix this issue? And generally speaking, you're going to want to start with changes that are high impact, high reach, and low cost. Those are going to be just the highest leverage changes that you can make. And, if time is limited, you want to start with those. Maybe you get pulled in another direction. You're in the middle of making changes and something else comes up. I know that's happening a lot these days. Just a lot is coming up that we weren't anticipating. That way you give yourself the best chance to have already knocked out the most important changes. So again, high impact, high reach, low cost changes are generally going to be the best place to start. And then if you can swing it, I recommend repeating this process every quarter-ish. Put in a recurring reminder every 3 to 4 months. And just, I know it sounds like a lot, but these actions are about as important as it gets on our website. And we want to avoid a situation where we don't know that our visitors are frustrated or they're unable to take key website actions. So to the extent that you can, try and put in a reminder for 3 to 4 months. And this process will also get faster over time as you do it. So you'll get some economies of scale in that way. So yeah, that's conversion paths. Next up, make your pages easier to scan. Very few visitors will read your pages start to finish. Just even your biggest fans, your most loyal supporters probably are going to scan your pages before they dive in just to get a sense of what it's about. And just think of how you read web pages. Like, it's probably pretty rare that you start at the top of the page and just read every word all the way down. Generally, you're scanning headings, you're scrolling around a bit. You just want to make sure that reading the page is going to be a good use of your time. And so we want to make that process as easy as we possibly can for our visitors. And generally speaking, most web pages on the internet, most nonprofit websites are just too wordy or written in a way that's just too dense. Now, thankfully, fixing that is not typically a major lift. So in terms of how we actually do that, first, identify your most valuable and most trafficked pages. And a lot of times I recommend just starting with those pages that were most important to the conversion paths that you just spent time outlining. Those are going to be the pages that are doing a lot of the heavy lifting for the casual website visitor and give you the best chance of turning them into a more active participant in the movement that you're building. So you want to make sure those pages are really dialed in before moving on to other pages. And a good place to start is just by adding headings to your pages if there aren't already headings within the body of your page. I know it sounds really simple, but you might be surprised just the difference that proper and compelling headings can make in the overall flow and structure of a page, and also just the actual engagement metrics, the time people are spending on your pages, the bounce rate where people land on a page and bounce right off without going to another page. You can really level up those engagement metrics just by being really thoughtful about the headings that you're using throughout your pages. They're just really kind of the ultimate guideposts for readers. It'll help them get a quick sense of what the page is about, and also jump to the right part of the page that is most relevant to the sort of challenge or question at hand for them. Also, added benefit, they help with search engine performance. They help you optimize for search. So definitely spend a little bit of time polishing up your headings if it's been a little while since you revisited them. And then also, this one is super easy. Just go add some paragraph breaks. With your headings in place, just break up the blocks of content on the page. Generally, a few sentences for a paragraph is going to be a good guideline to follow. It just gives your readers a visual break. And it also makes your page just feel less overwhelming when a visitor lands on the page. You don't want that immediate feeling to be they're getting hit with a dense block of text. So breaking it up with headings and paragraph breaks can go a really long way. And then also add lists, add columns, and other formatting elements when appropriate. So look for opportunities to really improve the layout or formatting of your pages. It could be that you take an item or a list of items that was written out in paragraph form and break that up into bullets, or maybe you break info up into columns just to make them a little easier to scan. Another trick that I know we are big fans of, a lot of our clients are big fans of, is breaking up text into collapsible accordions if you have that kind of functionality on your website. That way visitors can expand the accordion items that are interesting or relevant to them, but they don't have to scroll through a bunch of content that isn't relevant or isn't as sort of pressing in whatever need brought them to the website. So you don't need to over format your pages, but just a little bit of polish for readability can go a really long way in making your pages easier to scan and promote engagement. And here's just a little before and after example. So you can see on the left, we have this before, just big blocks of text, no easy way to scan. And then on the right, we have a heading setting up the section. We have a brief intro and outro. They're pretty short. They're to the point. We've broken what were big paragraphs into some bullets here. And then we've also bolded just a brief summary statement for each bullet, because these bulleted items are a little bit longer. So we've pulled out just a brief, almost like a subheading that is laying out what each bullet is about. These kinds of changes just really go a long way when it comes to turning casual visitors, again, into active, engaged supporters of your cause. All right, we're on the home stretch. The last one here is refreshing out-of-date information. It happens to the best of us, right? Like you're looking around your website and you notice something that is just woefully outdated. It's years old. It's still lingering on a page. It doesn't represent your organization in the way that you're talking about it now. You don't need to beat yourself up over it, but we do need to get these things corrected, because too much outdated information can start to erode trust on the part of our visitors, especially if they're reading contradictory information. And like we talked about before, a confused mind never convert. And so again, the good news here is cleaning this up just doesn't generally take a whole lot of time. And that to really streamline the process, we're going to call out some of the most common types of information that we see get outdated on nonprofit websites. We're going to go through these pretty quickly, so we want to make sure we have plenty of time for Q&A. So start by reviewing past event information. Just, do you have listings of events that have clearly passed? Are you pushing people to register for events that have passed? Are old events maybe taking up some pretty valuable real estate that could be going to new events or other calls to action? If so, just start by removing the promotion of any past events that are in the past, and really make sure that you're leaning on those upcoming events to drive people to take action. And if the event had its own dedicated subpage on your website, don't delete it. There might be links floating around your website, around the internet, in people's inboxes that point to those subpages, and we don't want to break those links by deleting it. So instead, you can do a few things, but generally what we recommend, the simplest thing, is just update, especially if it was a big event, a really popular event, update the page to make it clear that the event has passed. Thank everyone who supported the event, everyone who came out. You can write up just a really short recap of the event, even share a photo if you have one. And then one thing I think that can be really effective is let visitors know when to expect the next event. If it is, especially if it's a recurring event, if it's something you do annually, like a conference, or you do a big gala, you can make it clear that this is coming up again. Here's a link to that upcoming event, or let people know when to sort of expect information about that. It's worth noting this process might look a little different just depending on how events are handled on your site. I know we have a bunch of clients, some that I know are using the event system. For our tools, the way that it works is it'll remove the event from the upcoming feed. So you wouldn't see like the actual listing showing an upcoming event feed anymore around the site, but that subpage will still exist. And so if you want to polish up that subpage a little bit, especially if it's going to continue to get traffic for whatever reason, again, some of these quick changes can be a nice, easy way to level up those pages. If you're relying on page content to power like upcoming events, just listing out upcoming events, that's where you're going to want to go in and manually delete out those promotions of upcoming or of events that have already passed. You want to make it clear that that is in the rearview mirror at this point. Next up, staff pages. This is honestly one place that it is so easy to overlook, which makes sense. Like a lot of times when there is turnover on staff, it's, there's a lot of responsibility shuffling around. It's a lot of scrambling to make sure we're covering everything that needs to get done. A lot of times trying to find someone new to join the team. It's really easy to overlook staff page changes. So start by reading over the staff page. And if anyone had left, there's a few things we recommend doing. So first, remove their information from your staff page or your team page. If they had an individual subpage, you're going to want to unpublish the page, but be sure to put in a redirect that sends visitors to the main staff or team page if that's something you have the ability to do. That way you just don't have broken links floating around the internet. Again, like we talked about with the event, we don't want people landing on a page not found error. And for a lot of individual staff pages, they might be ranking in search engines. So it's also a way to preserve some of that search engine value for the individual page and pass that back to other pages of your website. So again, put in a redirect if at all possible. You're going to want to search through your website for their name, for their email address or other contact info, and just update any references to that staff member. I can't tell you how often that, program coordinator or a volunteer manager or someone else who is just in a public facing role ends up leaving and there's just old contact info floating around the website. So do a quick search, make updates. That's the kind of stuff we're looking for here. Just making sure that we're either removing that, especially if it's a past event, you could probably just remove contact information. If it's a program, it's more of an ongoing thing. Just update it to the best person or redirect people to a form that doesn't have a specific person outlined. It just is more of a general form that routes to the appropriate person on your team. And speaking of forms, make sure you review form settings. This is such an easy one to miss because it's more of a background kind of back office type of change, but you just want to make sure that the person who left isn't the only recipient for email notifications when forms are submitted. It happens all the time that, so donation emails or program applications are being sent to an inbox for someone that's no longer at the organization. And sometimes that email hasn't been forwarded. No one's monitoring that inbox and things start slipping through the cracks. So this is such an easy change. You just have to remember it. So that's why we wanted to call it out. Review form settings, make sure they're routing to the right people. And while you're at it, if this person had access to your site as a user, consider removing or restricting their access. Generally, you're going to want to remove it altogether. Depending on your tech, you might not be able to remove it altogether. Even if you left on good terms, it's just a good idea from a security standpoint to limit who has access to log into your site and make edits. Generally speaking, the way this will kind of work is you would transfer any files, any pages that they own, any blog posts that they own to a new user, and then you would be able to delete their user from the website. So yep, just a quick punch list to walk through when someone leaves. Hopefully this helps streamline that process a little bit. And also review your board page. Honestly, you can generally follow that process we just walked through with staff changes. Generally, these are more public facing. Most board members don't have access to edit the website, so you can usually take that off of the table. So we're not going to dive into this one in as much detail, but for both staff and board pages, one other note, just be sure to add anyone new to these pages. It's a really great way to build trust with visitors, but also just celebrate new staff members, new board members. I can't tell you how often we talk to someone who's a few months in, maybe they're in a new kind of like marketing role, development role, and we go to the website and they're not listed there. And it can just, it's making it a priority to get folks listed on the website can help them feel appreciated. And it's also just a nice way to celebrate all the passion and the time that they're bringing to moving the cause forward. So that's that. And board pages. And we also want to mention here, review your program and service details. We hear from nonprofits all the time who say their program details on the website just don't really reflect what they're offering, how they talk about their work in the community. If that sounds like you are not alone. It's really common. I totally get how it happens. You're busy actually running the programs. It's easy to let the website side of things slip by a little bit. Again, it does not need to be a huge undertaking to bring things into alignment. So first, start by checking your website navigation. Does your navigation reflect the programs you offer? If not, that's a really usually quick win to just remove anything from the navigation that's outdated, add anything that's missing. And then this is sort of the pro tip that fits under that one, is sort of nested within the navigation, but are your most popular programs listed first in your navigation or in any lists of programs, you think about like a drop down in your navigation. The first menu items there tend to get more attention. Just they're sort of the primacy and recency effect. They're sort of the nerdy psychological terms for them, but people tend to give more weight to things that happen at the beginning and the end of lists. And so you can use that to your advantage. Just list your most important or your most popular programs first. Again, a really easy, potentially high leverage change that could help drive traffic to the most important places on the website. Next up, kind of like we talked about with events, are you still promoting programs that you're no longer offering? This happens all the time. You find an outdated program, remove the page from your site, just redirect visitors to a related program or to your main programs page as a way to tackle it. Are there any programs you've started offering that are missing? You start with a really simple version of a page. You do not need to create the most beautiful, incredibly polished version of a page to get it out into the world. Start simple, provide the most important information, the clearest next step that someone can take. Publish version 1.0 of that page, and then you can always include more details. You can always answer questions that you're getting asked. That can be a nice signal of what content needs to be added to a page once it's live. Have the names of any programs changed? Again, a really quick fix, update the name of the page. If the URL changes, be sure, again, to put in a redirect from the old page to the new one. That way you won't risk broken links floating around. And then take it one step further. Always recommend searching your website for that old name just to see if it's still being used somewhere across the site. It might be in other pages of the site, and it can be a pretty quick swap it out for the new name for that program or that service. Next, are the details about each program still accurate? If not, get them updated. Hopefully this is a pretty quick change. And finally, is the next step clear for visitors who are interested in your program? You want to make sure that visitors know what the next step looks like. If they are interested, just adding a really clear, compelling call to action or details on how to reach out can go a really long way in, again, engaging more of your visitors and turning more visitors into donors, volunteers, supporters of your cause in whatever way they're looking to get involved. So that is it. Are there other changes you could make to level up your site? Of course, there are a ton of changes you could make, but hopefully this is a helpful place to start and just makes the process of updating your site for the new year feel a little bit less daunting, gives you some high leverage ways to level things up and better engage more of your visitors.